Good evening. Thank you all for joining us this evening. You're going to hear the shortest speech by a politician ever tonight. And I talked to Brad about this. Brad wanted me to do a little bit of a legislative update. And it's so early in the session, y'all, there isn't a lot of bills that have been filed, but I want to talk, what I'm primarily going to talk about is school finance, because that's going to have a really tremendous impact on the real estate business, because it's about property tax reduction as well as about adequately funding our public schools. So before I do that, just a little bit about me. Like Brad said, I'm in my 9th term in the Texas House of Representatives. I represent District 51, which is Central East Austin, South Central Austin, and Southeast Travis County. So the airport's in my district, F1 track's in my district, Rainy Street is in my district, all of South Congress and all that craziness. So it's a pretty incredible district. I'm not just saying that because it's mine, but it really, I think, is very symbolic or emblematic of what Austin is like. You just have this great disparity of not just disparity, but also a diversity of people and income and everything else. And my district really represents that, I think. So I'm originally from McAllen, Texas, down the valley. I don't know how many people know that. Oh, there you go. There's always someone from the valley everywhere you go. But I moved to Austin to attend school here at UT and just fell in love with the city. That was back in 1991, and I never left. Got elected in 2002, and 3 years after that, started law school at the University of Texas, and got that degree in 2008. And I don't practice law, but it was a tremendous education to have. What happened with the law school thing is I clerked at a law firm, and I realized I want to be happy. I don't want to be a lawyer. So that's my story there. So really briefly, school finance is going to be the issue of the session. Speaker Bonin, he's a first-term speaker. He's been in office for many years, but this is his first time as Speaker of the House. We had Joe Strauss, who was Speaker for 10 years. He decided not to run for re-election to the House, and so we had an election, basically, for Speaker. And so Dennis won out, and he has stated when he accepted the nomination and was elected Speaker, that school finance is the priority of the Texas House of Representatives. The governor has said as much, and Dan Patrick, the Lieutenant Governor, has pretty much said the same thing. So it's safe to say that, this session, we're going to tackle school finance. We kind of have to do it. There's a window of opportunity here, y'all, because you know what redistricting is, right? That's happening next session. And when and I've gone through 4 redistricting sessions. When that happens, nothing else really matters, because everyone's trying to save their own skin, right? Make sure their districts are there and all that stuff. So Speaker Bonin sees this as an opportunity, and we're going to take it. So there's been 2 plans out already. Where is it? Sorry. Okay, so the House is proposing a $9 billion. That's what the House. Nothing's been filed yet, but that is what Speaker Bonin has expressed, that $9 billion will go towards school finance. But there's a caveat to that conditional, so $9 billion would go back to all the different school districts around the state. But you also have to have property tax reduction in order for that to take effect. So that's a really important aspect of it. The Senate is offering much less. They're suggesting, I think, $2.3 billion with the same caveat. So that's a huge difference, right? It's like $7 billion difference. So that's going to be pretty much the fight of the session, is where we're going to land in between. And obviously with property taxes, we all know in this room how that impacts our business, whether you're in the title business like I am, or whether you're a realtor or a banker or a developer, whatever. So I think we're going to see some property tax relief in the coming couple of years. This $9 billion that we're proposing, which I would support that over 2.3, is kind of a one-time deal right now, unless we change the formulas that deal with Robinhood and all that other kind of stuff, which probably would go hand in hand. We'll have to do that. So it'll be for the next 2 budget cycles, which would be 2020 and 2021. So then I think at that point, you should see some reduction in property taxes. I can't tell you right now because nothing's been filed, and it's just way too early to say what that's really going to mean. Maybe we do a follow-up, Brad, to this after session to have a better idea. So that's kind of, I know there's a lot to it, but I just kind of want to go through a couple of other really quick things. There's a couple of sunset bills that will be impacting the real estate industry. So I asked this question: how many know what the sunset process is? That's what I thought. Well, there's a few. Yeah, there you go. By state law, the state of Texas reviews agencies every 12 years to see if those agencies should continue to exist. And for the most part, agencies will continue to exist. But there's been a few that the state has decided we can combine that agency with another agency and all that kind of stuff. So the Texas Real Estate Commission is going under sunset review, or there's going to be a sunset bill. Right now, what I've heard from my realtor, the folks at the Association of Realtors, is that that association representing realtors around the state is supportive of the suggested changes to that commission. And don't ask me what those suggested changes are. I'm sorry, I don't know that right off the top of my head, and it's not on my notes. But we can get that to you because we have a list of everyone's emails and everything else if you all want that. And also, Texas Appraiser Licensing and Certification Board is under sunset, and that's an interesting one because there's going to be some bills this session. I'm sure there are going to be appraisal reform type bills to kind of change the way the appraisal process goes, and that'll have potentially an impact on our industries as well. So we're going to wait to see on that. I don't know the specifics on that quite yet. And pretty much, yeah, those are the main ones on the sunset bills. And I'll leave y'all with this on the sunset stuff, is that sunset bills, when they're on the floor of the House, it's kind of, we call them Christmas tree bills because everyone tries to put amendment after amendment after amendment on a sunset bill, and it's usually a bill that we couldn't get out of committee or something. And so it ends up being like a 12-hour debate on a sunset bill because everyone wants to try to pass a law through that bill. So that's going to be fun this session to see what happens with that. But again, I think this session is going to be all about school finance, and that's the main thing that we're going to be focusing on. I just got appointed to 3 committees yesterday. I'm on the State Affairs Committee, which deals with basically utilities, electric power utilities, some water issues, telecommunications, and a very broad, anything that deals with the state of Texas kind of thing. So that one, and then I'm on Ways and Means, so I'll be looking at potentially revenue caps or appraisal caps that might be coming up this session as well. And then on the Calendars Committee, which determines which bills get to the floor of the House for debate. So I'm excited to be on those and hopefully work hard on that. So I think we're all here at Eldon, right? That's why we're all here. So I'm going to stop, and I'll answer some questions if I can. I know it was 30,000 feet, but that's just because we don't have a lot of bills to point to and a lot of specifics right now. But I'll be happy to answer some questions if you all have them. If I can.
Hey, what are the alternatives to property taxes? We're going to spend more money on schools. I get that. That's great that our property taxes are going to go down. We're going to pay for it somewhere. I've not heard some of the solutions as to where that's going to come from.
Well, I mean, if you're asking, like, if we're going to give a certain amount of dollars to school districts, like how is that going to impact the
proposing to cap increases to our property taxes or even lower them, that's going to necessarily reduce the amount of dollars available to fund schools. But we're also proposing to maintain funding for schools. Where does the other revenue come from?
Well, that would be probably in the formula funding. So there's going to probably be some changes to the formula funding and how that's worked out, which is separate and apart from here's $9 billion to the school district. If we actually go, because that's not systematic change, that is literally a one-time injection of revenue. I won't be as happy with that if it's just a one-time deal, because I don't know, they're going to see their property taxes go up 2 years, 4 years from now, 3 years from now, whatever. So I think we're going to have to make some changes to the formulas as it impacts all the school districts. And Austin, I represent Del Valle ISD and Austin ISD. Austin is very strange. It's the only district in the state like this where it gives over 50% of the taxes raised by AISD go to the state of Texas. So taxpayers that live in AISD paying school taxes, actually 51% of that money goes to the state of Texas to be redistributed out to the lower income area districts. And that's just, and I'm okay, we need to help lower income districts, I have no problem with that, but no one school district should pay over 50% of their local property taxes to the state of Texas. At that point, that becomes a state property tax, I think. So we're going to see a lawsuit with that. So I hope that answers your question. We'll be on the formulas to see how we can adjust those so that those will be more permanent. So the state will have to give more money on an annual basis to it.
So, the $9 billion
though some of it will go, some of it will go for teacher pay raises, because it's earmarked for teacher pay raises. Well, in the Senate one, I think it goes to teacher pay raise specifically. But my understanding of right now, because we don't have a bill yet to look at, is there is some money directly, this is the money you're going to pay teachers some more. Part of this is going to go for paying teachers more money. And then the rest of it's going to have to go directly to lowering your property tax. That the school taxes, we all know, is probably roughly 65% of your property tax bill. So that's more, it's more of just a swap, essentially. Yeah. Did that answer your question? Any other questions? Yes, sir.
You mentioned something about the American.
Yeah, I mean, there's been bills. Last session there was a bill, and I can't remember exactly what it did, that addressed how the appraisal district does its job, and a lot of that has to do with when you sell a home, you know, you disclose, you can disclose to the appraisal district what you paid for it, or what it was sold for. Texas.
Do you think anything's going to change as far as them hiring CRE to appraise commercial property?
That's been proposed.
That's been going on.
Yeah, that's been proposed. Yeah, before. Yeah, that hasn't been filed yet, but that could very well be. I think that was proposed last session. I'd love to talk to you about that. So, I'm interested in those kind of bill ideas. Yeah. Yeah, I think we're in a situation where there's just a lot of need, and so what happens is we have the appraisal cap at 8%. Virtually every year we hit 8%. If you go beyond 8%, you have to go to the voters, and the voters vote yes or no on the increase in the property tax rate, at least. And so it's a continuous every single year it's going to hit 8%. That's why the appraisal cap bill was to lower that from 8% to 6%. The Senate wanted 4%, that kind of deal. So that you go to the voters if you increase it above 6% instead of 8%, that kind of thing. But what ends up happening is there's definitely communication between the appraisal district, the school districts, the county, the city, hospital district, ACC, all that. They're not supposed to really be talking to each other and planning all this stuff out, but generally speaking, realistically, I think a level of that happens.
Somebody's going to get pushed to commercial.
Yes, yeah, I remember that from the city of Boston wanted, or Travis County wanted to do that. Yeah, but I'd love to talk to you more about that. Yeah. Anyone else?
I still have a question on teachers' pay.
Okay.
I was a teacher in Michigan. We had unions, totally different down here in Texas. I just feel like, especially in Austin, AISD, it's really sad.
What they get paid
Teachers are getting paid.
versus the cost of living.
And absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree with you 100%.
So
It's not in my.
where is that going to go? Because there's so much money in so many districts, and in AISD, there's not. But those kids deserve, these children deserve the same amount of education as what the districts that have a lot of money.
Well, the number that's sticking in my head is $5,000 a year of an increase, right? That's what the $9 million on the House proposal, which isn't been out yet, but that number is $5,000 a year per teacher increase. But that's going to be only for 2 years, right? Because our budgets are we have a 2-year cycle. So the reason why AISD is so limited in what they can pay is because they're paying 51%, sending 51% of the money back to the state of Texas. So they're not as flexible as other districts can be, which is why I said we should.
But
So
there still is so much money in Austin. Like, if you look at AISD, if you look at Golden, if you look at Travis Heights, there's so much money. Like, why is that not going towards the teachers?
well, but
Why is
this could really become a long conversation. That's fine with me, except for realizing my time. But at the same time, if you look at AISD,
I'm not trying to be combative.
No, I know you're not. I know you're not. And if you were, that'd be fine.
I'm an ex-teacher. I'm a realtor now, but when I was a teacher,
That you.
it makes me sad.
No, I agree.
Every
100%.
child has a right
But-
to the same amount of
Agreed.
education.
But
Everyone does.
AISD is also, when you look at the percent, it's changed a little bit, but it's roughly 60 to 65% of the students qualify for free or reduced lunch. It's a different, they just have a lot of greater need, and they have a lot of special ed kids too. And so, versus other school districts around, right? So what you have is a lot of people, if you look at I live in Central East Austin. I live just east of Rainy Street, about 4 or 5 blocks. There are no more kids in my neighborhood. I don't see any more kids in the neighborhood at all. I see a lot of kids, what I would call kids. They're like 20-something and 30-something, with beards longer than mine, but they don't have children. They don't have children. And so there's 2 schools in my immediate neighborhood that are set for potential closure because they're under enrolled. Right? They have one of them, I think Sanchez might have 39% enrollment, right? So, but they still have to keep the lights on. They still have to pay, the teachers and everything else. So there's just a lot of other. I'm not justifying teachers not getting a raise or getting more money from AISD. I know this. This is being recorded, by the way. So yeah. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is there are a lot of.
Teachers getting the raise, it's about like children, like getting the best.
I agree. Yeah, completely. Yeah.
I was a teacher in Cedar Park for 5 years.
Did you get? Yeah. Okay.
And it's a little bit different down here than
It
in
is.
Michigan, where I taught for 17 years. It's a totally different ballgame. And I just think that these children deserve, every child deserves to have the best education, no matter where you live.
I completely agree.
Park, Anchor, Westlake,
I agree.
Travis,
Completely agree.
that's mine.
And I think the more money the AISD can keep, the better they're able to do that.
Anyway, thanks, Brad. Thanks, Capstone Title, for inviting me out this evening to talk a little bit about the Austin real estate economy and focusing on housing. Certainly some familiar faces in the room, so hello to some of you, and then many faces that I don't know. So it'll be interesting to talk a little bit and get to know some of you guys maybe when we're done. So yeah, Brad mentioned that we met some time ago, but have gotten reconnected through Urban Land Institute. And since I'm the chair of membership and he's on my committee, we'll expect to recruit at least 2 or 3 members tonight, right, Brad? Okay, new members to ULI. So just real briefly, Brad touched on it a little bit. I grew up in Houston, like Eddie, went to school here and never left. And that was almost 40 years ago. So I've seen, as many of you have, Austin change a little bit over the last couple of years. As I like to tell some of my friends who continuously complain about Austin and its growth, that you probably wouldn't be able to make a living in Austin doing what you're doing if it weren't for a economic situation that is robust. So it's been a good place to make a living for all of us, and just a great town. So I have been circling around the real estate thing in terms of analysis and evaluation for my whole career. I started at a school appraising commercial real estate, did that for about 12 years, had an MAI designation, and about 20 years ago moved into focusing on kind of single family detached housing and the whole lot development and construction process. I worked for a national company for about 17 years, and about 5.5 years ago started my own practice, 360 Real Estate Analytics. Primarily, 2 real components to my business. One is a retainer business where I have a number of bank, builder, developer, institutional clients that I meet with regularly to kind of help them get out of the forest, if you will, and see the big picture in terms of what's going on in the marketplace. And then we do a lot of site-specific consulting as well, all over the region, focusing on Central Texas. And most of it is for sale housing, whether it be urban or suburban. So what my plan is this evening is to kind of hit several areas. One of which is kind of talk a little bit about all of the headlines that we've been reading nationally that are ending up here about the housing market and the slowdown, if you will, nationally. Talk about that a little bit. And then I'll talk about the Austin economy and just kind of where we are and where I think things are headed over the next year or so, which has everything to do with demand for real estate products. Because so goes the economy and job growth, so goes demand for real estate, especially housing. And then I'll touch on kind of some statistics, if you will, on the housing side. As I go through my presentation, please don't hesitate to stop and ask questions. It's always a little bit more fun and entertaining as opposed to just hearing me talk, especially with my voice the way it is, which is not always quite this deep. I imagine I'm not the only one here that has been going through some interesting allergy stuff for the last couple of weeks, so bear with me. So yeah, feel free to stop and ask questions, and I'll be happy to take a stab at them. So first up, So those of you that can see this monitor, great. Those of you that are further back, you can watch basketball on the screen back there. So you can watch James Harden score 80 points tonight or something. So we have been bombarded over the last 3, 4, or 5 months, certainly with lots of headlines talking about the housing market slowing down. So wherever you live, whether you read a newspaper, you go online, or radio, or wherever it might be, there have been lots of headlines. And this one was certainly pretty prominent in the Wall Street Journal a couple of months ago because it talked about Dallas. And when you think about and look behind or peel away some of the headlines, there are two things. One, in many of the cases that they're talking about a slowdown in housing nationally, they are using statistics that are accurate. They're using real data. And so that is true. But at the same time, there are headlines that are out there and they proliferate much more now than they used to because of social media. So a couple of headlines I saw the last couple of weeks: home prices predicted to keep dropping, many markets still overvalued. This was some online expert. Another one was prices falling in these 7 cities where home prices are plummeting: Austin, College Station, San Antonio. So these headlines are not factual. So the reality is that some so-called experts interpret a deceleration in the appreciation of prices as prices going down, and that's not accurate. So, you're seeing lots of headlines out there that are negative. And the significant thing about that for us in Austin, Texas, is that people's psychology is impacted about from what they read and hear. And when they think about making big ticket purchases like cars and homes, their psychology is important. So it's important what people read. And so if they're reading a lot of negative information or headlines, that impacts their psyche, if you will. We took a look at, I'm not going to go through all the data here, but we took a look at kind of some statistics for Austin and Denver and Seattle. So Denver and Seattle have been pretty prominent in headlines over the last few months in terms of their market slowing. And the statistics are accurate, meaning there are more listings and the pace of sales has gone down slightly. So the months of supply has gone up in each of those markets. The pace at which prices are increasing has slowed in those markets. But when you peel back a little bit, the economies in those markets are still very strong, like Austin's. So if you look at the months of supply of resale in Denver and Seattle, on a percent basis, it's gone up pretty significantly, but both of them are still about a 2-month supply of inventory. So still very tight. And I'm not here to say that those markets will not continue to slow and weaken, but at this point, there's not a significant amount of data, trailing data, to really make a call in terms of how much they've slowed or they've actually softened, if you will. Austin, I'll get deeper into that here in a minute. But looking at Denver and Seattle, yes, they've slowed, but their economies are still robust. And if they're creating a lot of jobs, people are going to still buy houses. But what I'll get at here in a minute is they've priced some people out of the market. So most of you probably can't see this, so I'll kind of tell you what you're looking at. Basically, what we did was we took the multiplier of median home price to median family income for Austin, the major Texas markets, and then highlighted are Denver and Seattle. Over on the far right are San Francisco and San Jose. So if you take median family income in Austin, relate that to median home price, that ratio is about 3.5 times. Fairly consistent with the other Texas markets, which was kind of surprising because you always think of Austin much more expensive. But if you look at Denver and Seattle, they're 4.8 and 5. And they've gone up a lot over the last couple of years. So what's gone on in those markets is housing has gotten increasingly difficult for people to afford. And that's one of the reasons that those markets have slowed. And some of the people that live in those markets, that work in those markets, are having to drive out of those metropolitan areas to find housing that they can afford. So outside the actual MSAs. And then obviously San Francisco and San Jose, and it's staggering in terms of the multipliers there. So for Austin, what does that mean for us? So you can look at this graph and you see that blue line separating from that red line. So the red line is median family income. The blue is median home prices. So we, through the last couple of cycles, were somewhere between 2 and 2.5 times income. And then in the last 8 or 10 years, we've taken that multiplier to 3.5. So fairly significant change in terms of the affordability of housing in Austin. this is nothing that you guys don't know, but it is certainly for me and for my clients a growing concern, and one of the things that we have to think more about in terms of affordability of housing in our market. And as I look at different cycles, those markets that had the most disparity between incomes and home prices in the last couple of recessions were the ones that suffered a little bit more price declines during the downturn. I'm not saying that's going to happen here, but it is a little more of a concern now than when the multipliers are lower.
What year did that start?
1990. And then on the far right is 2018. Yeah, go ahead.
Is that a separated single-family dwelling?
I'm sorry?
Does that include multifamily or anything else, or is that all?
So that is median home price, single family, townhome condo. Yeah, so that's just the A-board number in terms of pricing. So when you line it up like that, I mean, it's kind of alarming, because we know home prices have gone up and we know incomes have gone up, but the disparity has gone up pretty significantly. It's interesting, 6 to 9 months ago, when we talked about the global economy and the US economy, it was pretty much all systems go. I mean, Europe was doing well, China was doing well, we were doing well, but over the last 6 months, things have changed a little bit. So China, a lot of uncertainty in terms of what's going on there. Their growth rate has dropped. And I'll be careful here because I'm not a PhD economist, but certainly the statistics that we read coming out of China are not always necessarily reflective of what's going on. But the economy there has weakened. And you can see that reading headlines here because obviously they're not buying nearly as many iPhones as they were or they were expected to. Europe, their years of prosperity coming out of the last recession have been fairly brief, it looks like. Tariffs, shutdown, issues that play into corporate profits as well as people's psyches. U.S. job growth, strong, stock market, volatile. That wasn't true a year ago. So the point is, in January of 2018, all systems were go, everything was strong in the U.S. and global economies, and that's not true now. Consumer confidence was extremely strong, still is strong, but not quite what it was a year ago, a small decrease in December. Mortgage interest rates, all of you guys know that, I guess through first part of December, we're up 100 basis points from where they were a year before. So that certainly, combined with prices going up in the housing market, slowed sales a little bit towards the end of the year. In U.S. housing starts, we don't know how many housing starts we had in December because the number generally is released in, I think, January 20th, but with the shutdown, that data hadn't come out. So it's kind of interesting. Yeah, go ahead, Robert. That's as much as I'm going to say. But I'll add one comment, Robert. So, we don't have, excuse me, certainly a significant of employment of government workers or federal government employees in Austin and some markets across the country. But what I will say is that the shutdown and how long it lasts is not a positive for people's psychology relative to where they think they are financially in the future. So, little things that are negatives in terms of psychology are not positive for people's thoughts about buying houses. So in terms of what my business is and what my clients are. So Austin, I did an event last week that we had 3 speakers. One was a kind of a macroeconomist, and it was interesting to hear her talk about the global and U.S. economy. The title of her talk was Crosswinds, Not Tailwinds, so kind of into that theme of tailwinds a year ago, now more crosswinds. But she kind of excluded Austin from that group. So you guys in Austin are different, because things are so strong here and continue to be. It's really interesting to me and to some of us who have been in Austin a long time to look at the profile of companies that are dominating the hiring, especially on the technology side, that weren't here at the beginning of this cycle or had very small presences, specifically Facebook, Amazon, Google. Apple had a presence here, but obviously is much more significant now, and they plan to grow here more in the future. So when I get asked questions about our economy and will we potentially have a recession or a tech recession at some point, my answer is usually, yes, it's not a matter of if, it's when. And I look at the technology companies, the big technology companies, as kind of the canary in the coal mine in terms of what they're doing relative to hiring or not hiring people. So the pure numbers in terms of job growth, so Austin, we've been doing 30, 40,000 jobs a year since 2011. Our unemployment rate's been below 3% the last 3 or 4 years. And when that's the case, a lot of people are gonna move here to take those professional jobs. And so that's what we've been seeing the last 4, 5, or 6, 7 years. There's a lot of people moving here, and when they get here, they gotta live somewhere. So they're gonna live in an apartment, they're gonna rent a house, they're gonna buy a resale, or they're gonna buy a new home. And when they do any of those things, there's kind of this churn in the housing market in terms of people buying. Yeah, go ahead. What's the score? No, okay. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, go ahead. Yeah, so the red line goes to the right axis, and that's the annual pace of job growth. Yeah. And the blue line is the percent unemployment rate on the left axis. Sorry about that, yeah.
So, I guess from a high-level view and a macroeconomic perspective, do you feel like we're at risk right now in the cycle of a recession, potential recession coming, being really a self-fulfilling prophecy with things like the government shutdown? Because, like you keep saying, it doesn't provide confidence to people. So, even if the numbers suggest one thing, does the potential for a recession later on this year or next year become a self-fulfilling prophecy just because of things like the shutdowns?
I don't know if I'm really qualified to answer that question in terms of as a macro economist. I mean, I don't think confidence is what is going to result in a recession. I mean, it's going to either be more of a asset bubble, it is going to be a collapse in confidence caused by some major shock to the system globally or nationally. Something like that, if you will. I don't know if the shutdown in itself will do that. I mean, I guess the experts or the budget people at the White House are saying that every week it's 1/10 of 1% of GDP or something like that. I probably didn't get that totally right, but that's not a significant factor over the short term, especially. So, the economists don't know what kind of recession is coming, what is going to cause it. The reality is that we've been in a upcycle we had job losses in 2009 every year since. It's been positive. So it's going to happen. It's just a matter of when. And we don't know what it's going to look like either. Absolutely. Pardon me?
And to what degree?
And to what degree, absolutely, yeah. Everyone is different. So I like to look at, as kind of a leading indicator of what's going on in the economy, is companies leasing space, because when companies are leasing big blocks of space or even small blocks of space, they expect to grow and they expect to hire people. One of the most interesting things to me about this cycle, after watching Austin over the last 30 years in its real estate economy, is the scale of the leases that are being executed in this town compared to years ago, if you will, the last couple cycles. When you talk to leasing agents, they talk about leases that used to be big leases in Austin were 50,000 feet. Now a big lease is 200, 300,000 square feet. And by the way, especially the tech companies, they're putting more people per square foot in their space than traditional clients are. So instead of maybe 2, 3, 4 per thousand, they're putting 5, 6, 7 people per thousand. So it's really interesting. So here's a few leases that were executed in the last year. So Facebook, 320,000 square feet, domain 12. Indeed, over 300,000 square feet, block 71, which is the old UT building downtown. Amazon, 140,000 square feet, domain 10. Visa, 135,000 square feet in Research Plaza, part 2. Some big major announcements in Austin last year. U.S. Army, the Future Command Center here. It's going to be really interesting to see what that spawns off in terms of other employers. We have a Navy person there. That's the only Army say. Okay, all right. HEB announcing that they're going to create their world-class tech facility over in East Austin and hire 500 people there. Residio, we didn't really read a lot about that. It was just kind of a small headline. moving their corporate headquarters. So Residio makes security type systems, a lot of them for residential. It's a $4.8 billion company. That's kind of a big deal. And then Oracle starting construction of the second phase of their campus right after they finish their first phase. And then another interesting thing to me that Eddie knows a lot about is the fact that two of those, really three of those employers are on the east side, and two of them are in East Austin. The changing complexity of East Austin is just, it's staggering, really. And it started kind of as a, all the funky bars and restaurants were there, and then a lot of apartments, and then a lot of duplexes and primary units with ADUs, and now the office market's moving over there. So there are, I don't know how many projects under construction, excuse my voice there, office projects over there that are under construction now, and there'll be more coming. And so it's two things. It's one, it is a lower price alternative than downtown, where new Class A space is $60 plus per square foot plus parking. Two, the fact that it's kind of cool and hip. So I had a leasing agent tell me the other day that downtown is corporate tech, East Austin is hip tech. So it's just a kind of a different flavor. It'll be interesting to see over the next 10 or 20 years, the changing complexity of Riverside Drive as well. There's a lot of land along Riverside that ultimately is going to be converted from apartments to office to mid-rise apartments. I would expect that when the rail system is announced, it just makes sense that you go downtown, across the river, Riverside Drive to the airport. So that'll be interesting to see over the next 10 or 20 years. So big announcements. I took a look at kind of the FANG companies, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and Google. Netflix is the only company in this list that doesn't have a presence in Austin. Over on the right side of the left part of the graph, you can see all of them took a fairly big hit to their net capitalization the last couple of months of the year. So, my question is, when or if or when does that begin to affect their thoughts about hiring more people and the pace of people they've been hiring? Because these companies are all in a war to outdo each other. But probably not anytime soon do they make big decisions because they have so much cash. The FANG stocks, net cap, 2.8 trillion, 12 months revenue, 644 billion. Those five companies now have, or as of last week, $246 billion in cash. Ford and GM combined have $43 billion. So those companies have amassed a lot of cash to continue to grow. And one of the cities that they have chosen as a place they want to grow is Austin, Texas. We're not the only one, but obviously with decisions like Apple's recently, they want to continue to grow here. I mean, we are already the largest base of employment for Apple outside of Cupertino, and that's only going to grow now. So they've announced at least 5,000 people and maybe up to 15,000. So it's a big deal for us, yeah.
I may be reading ahead and not realizing it.
Yeah.
But you haven't mentioned Dell, and you haven't mentioned the University of Texas, the new medical center, et cetera.
Yeah, so in the long version of my talk, certainly I mentioned, and more really in the context of during a slowdown or recessionary period, we will continue to be glad that the University of Texas, we're the seat of the state capital, and now we have this medical school with all of the associated and affiliated entities and business enterprises that are going to be coming to Austin as a result of that. So yeah, good point. We won't talk about it as much while these big tech companies are adding people, but we will at some point in time. So I mentioned a minute ago, when and if and when, some of the major tech companies begin to slow down their hiring. And, the first article that I have read really this cycle that lent any kind of info that might happen is Apple's announcement last week that they were going to slow the pace of hiring. They didn't make any comments in their announcement where, how many, but they were going to slow the pace. And obviously it's because they missed their earnings estimates significantly and they're looking at slower growth over the next year or so. Probably not a big deal for Austin, but at some point in time, we all will be reading headlines about tech companies, not only probably slowing their hiring, but shedding people. And history tells us that we don't really pay attention to that in the real estate industry. We just keep going. So my advice to my clients is pay attention because those are significant in terms of your business. But there's nothing on the forefront that tells us we're going to see that anytime soon. The apartment market, we don't generate this data. The provider that I get my information from is Austin Investor Interest. They have not released all of their granular data, but I have gotten their fourth quarter 2018 rent and occupancy figures. The apartment market is important for the housing market, especially for new home builders, because the apartment market is generally the primary conduit by which people move into town, they move into an apartment, and then they move over to housing, to buy a house. And if rents are increasing, it drives that movement. It makes it easier for people to move to buy if their rents are going up. And as you can see from this graph, that red line is rents going back to 1997, a fairly significant increase in rents over the last couple of years. We've been adding a lot of supply the last few years, so we've been building, I think, 7 or 8, 9,000 units a year the last 4 or 5 years. But the fact that we've been producing 30 to 40,000 jobs a year and a lot of people moving here really hasn't impacted the market that much in terms of rent and occupancy. Occupancy rate's gone down a little bit, but rents remain strong. So that's generally pretty good news for the housing market. On the new home side, in terms of total permits, so this graph goes back to 97. So for those of you in the back, we peaked out at somewhere around 18,000 in 2005, went down to about 6,000 in 2011, and we're now up around 16,300, 16,400 permits in the region in 2018. So not quite as much growth as we had last year. My expectation coming into 18 was we'd do somewhere around 17,000, so we didn't quite get there. And that is because we slowed down a little bit right at the end of the year for a few reasons I'll go over here in a second. So it's got some major bullet points for the housing market. So we entered 2018 really with questions about supply, not demand. So going back to the beginning of my talk, when we entered 18, job growth strong, consumer confidence strong, interest rates are low, the global national economies are strong. It was really a matter of, can we build enough houses at the right price ranges in the right locations to satisfy how much demand we had? So that was the question. And we build and sell half of our houses in this market between 200 and 300,000, 2 and 300,000. And it's hard to find land to get entitled, develop, to do that in the region, much less Austin. A great start to the year in 2018. So the first 6 months of the year were about 10 to 12% above what we were in 2017. And then we got to the fall. So things began to change a little bit. So the combination of rising home prices and interest rate hikes, some people started to pull back a little bit. So not quite as many sales on the new home side in the fall. Delays in lot deliveries. So we had some rain in October, if anybody remembers that. So that delayed a lot of the builders and developers in terms of getting their lots on the ground. I'm not going to get political, Eddie, but we had a midterm election. And a number of builders that I talked to, they really felt that the midterms being more like a presidential in 2018, that there was some added uncertainty there for some folks that maybe caused them to pause a little bit in terms of making decisions like purchasing a home. And then obviously, as we moved into November and the first part of December, significant volatility in the equity markets. And that makes people a little bit nervous. And so they probably held off some of their decisions in terms of buying. That all said, things slowed down a little bit in October and November. But it was really nice to hear as we got late into December and everybody was a little bit glum about October and November, that things picked up in December. And the builders that I've talked to over the first few weeks of January have really had a strong first couple of weeks of this year, which is no surprise because again, we had significant pent-up demand, rates went down a little bit, the elections are over, holidays are over, and the new year started pretty strong, so that's good news. On the resale market, the numbers for December came out, I think it was yesterday, so the pace of sales goes up. And again, be careful when you read headlines, because I think the headline in either October or November was the pace of sales, housing sales slows in Austin. And I think the data point they used was month over month comparison year over year, but if you looked at the annual pace of sales, they were still up like 3% for the year. So you have to look a little bit deeper. I think probably the most critical variable in looking at the status of the market, especially on the resale side, is the months of supply. So for those of you in the back, the red line on the right axis is the months of supply of inventory. Probably about 80% of this is resale and 20 new. And you can see that number, months of supply, has been below 4 months for 76 months. So doing the math, that's what, 6 years plus? Equilibrium, I always get asked that question, and as you guys know, it's different by submarket, it's different by price. So, you know, many people smarter than me like to say somewhere between 4 and 6 months. You know, my reply to that is if you look at that red line, you're not in equilibrium very long because things are either really strong or they're going to be weak. So you notice in that area between the green dotted lines, it doesn't stay there that long. But most critically, the length of that red line down there compared to the last couple of cycles, either cycles that we were oversupplied or undersupplied, that's a long time. I mean, 6 years. And if the months of supply is below 4 months overall, prices are going to go up. I mean, you have more demand than you do supply. And I'm not saying that that's true in every submarket, every price range, but overall as a market, if inventory is that tight, prices are going to go up. Probably one interesting thing that we really won't know for a few months is when you look at the months of supply, during the winter months, it goes down, so less inventory, but the denominator is the annual pace. So the annual pace is obviously, you know, adjusted seasonally. This winter, the month's supply did not go down quite as low as it has the last couple of years. So that tells me maybe a little bit of slackening in terms of demand and supply in our market. But that said, still very strong. Any guys have questions about the downtown condos? I don't track those closely in my own business, but for an event I did last week, I went ahead and called all of the marketing folks with the downtown condos just to kind of see where they were in terms of their sales. So the independent, they expect to move people in beginning this quarter, although they're having all kinds of issues with the city of Austin. What a surprise in terms of they're getting their COs. 86% sold. Fifth and West is actually moving people in now, 90% sold. 70 Rainey will begin moving people in the first quarter of this year, 75% sold. And Austin proper begin moving people in April, 71% sold. And this is before they finish the buildings, really. So go ahead.
I had a quick question. On those 90% numbers, is that actual people moving in, or is that, you know, investors buying those?
Those are hard contracts. So committed contracts. And I did not ask each of them because I really wasn't that curious for that conversation, what percent investor purchases they were allowing. And I doubt they were going to answer that question anyway. But we all know that once these buildings close, meaning they close the units that are under contract, there'll be rentals for the investor-owned stuff. And Robert, you might know better than I do how long you have to own your unit before you can put it resale. Is it a year or something like that? Yeah, so, but you know they're there. I mean, in general, I mean, if you're in this business and you were lucky enough to have one of these buildings, your timing could not have been any better. I mean, what an amazing period to be selling downtown condos given the economy the last 3 or 4 years. Because it takes these, 3 years, 4 years to maybe even longer to get entitled and built. And from what I understand, the next, and Robert's going to contradict me on this, the next downtown proper vertical condo will not be delivered for at least 3 years, I think, something like that. Okay, there we go. I knew Robert would contradict me on that. Are you east or west of 35? Okay, you can't talk about it. All right.
But it's not going to be just a standard contract.
Okay, all right. So yeah, I mean, what an amazing period to be selling those units. And it's no surprise that they've all done really well given how strong our economy has been. So ask the developers of the W and Austonian, how it went for them. The timing just was not right. So it's a huge investment and you just hope to be lucky to some extent. A little bit of information, just kind of peeking at the market for new construction in some of the urban markets. So I took a look at 78702 and 78704. And what I focused on was new construction, detached, so that was single family detached, condo attached, maybe by garage 2 units, or primary with ADU. So I excluded the larger condo projects that had more than, say, 8 or 10 units from this analysis, okay? And I know you can't see this, but basically my goal in running the data was to compare the relative supply in January of this year to a year ago to see if it had loosened up at all. So the months of supply a year ago was 1.5 in 78702, and the months of supply 10 days ago was 1.4 months. Now, there is inventory over there that is for sale that is not in MLS, so that's not in this data, so I recognize that. But the months of supply is still really low. What is kind of interesting, I think, over there is how high a percentage of those units are so small, because you have a lot of ADUs over there. So 24% of the sales in the last 12 months were less than 1,000 feet. Kind of interesting. Another thing that came up in my conversations with some of the folks that build over there is the ones that have been building in 02 for 4, 5, or 6 years, they're all complaining that the new builders over there are paying way too much for their lots. And so they have begun to migrate further east over towards Montopolis, Pleasant Valley, some of those areas where they can buy and do their primary and ADU and get out for somewhere around $1.2 million, $1.3 million. And you can't do that apparently in Near East Austin now, so it's kind of interesting. 78704, the months of supply now is actually 4.5 months. It was 5.7 a year ago. As many of you know, it's gotten really expensive over there. The reason that the average price has gone down a little bit, actually the median, is I think there's just more ADUs in that number. So the price of those is going to be less, but that market is still very strong. As you guys know, Barton Hills has turned into a luxury market. A lot of it because it feeds into Austin High School, so that really has changed over there. And then some of the builders are beginning to move further south because it's just tough to find lots over there where they can build and sell, less than $1 million. But in general, if you just circularly look at the data, it's still pretty strong. A couple slides on the high-end market. I know you guys can't see this, but basically what I did was say, okay, for new and resale above 750, what's the month's supply now compared to a year ago? And focusing on the price points below 2 million, not much change really. And those of us who have been doing this a while know that when things get out of whack and they're not strong, that months of supply goes up significantly, and that's not the case here. And then just looking at new construction, the only one that is noteworthy in terms of I don't want to say negative, but just a little concern, is the months of supply between 750 and 1 million new construction. It's gone from 4.8 to 7.3 in the last year. Go ahead.
Will you read the numbers along the bottom of the x-axis?
Yeah, so basically it's 750 to 1 million, 1 million to 1.5 million, 1 million after 2, 2 to 2.5, 2 after 3, plus 3. I would focus on the below 2 million because you get over that, the data set is so small that it can really be distorted. So I think I'm going to make these available to you guys so you can, yeah, they'll have all of these available so you can see them a little bit better. Any questions on that? No? Okay. All right, so looking forward. So 2019, the economic data suggests continued strong demand for housing. I mean, job growth is strong. I mean, we did 36,000 jobs in the last year. The numbers are revised in March. I wouldn't be surprised if they're revised down a little bit just because of a little bit of the shakiness in some of the tech companies recently. But if it's above 25,000, that's still good for us, especially with such a low unemployment rate. Good sales in December and early January bode well for spring market. I mean, that's what the builders, the production builders below, say, 700,000, they're looking for a strong early mid-January because that bodes well for them because they sell most of their houses in January, February, and March, and the year started good. That said, buyer confidence is a little more fragile than it's been any time this cycle. And the reason is, some of those points that I talked about earlier in terms of some of the shakiness globally, nationally, a shutdown, et cetera. People's psyches are just a little bit different than they were a year ago, and that's important for our industry. Higher interest rates and price increases. Prices aren't going down. Because the reality is that land prices, there's no incentive for landowners in this region to drop their price because all they see is success around them. So prices aren't going down. Every municipality in the region is making it increasingly expensive for developers and builders to get lots on the ground. They're making it increasingly more challenging in terms of time, which increases risk and cost. Builder material prices have gone down a little bit because lumber's gone down so significantly, but prices are going up. There's a lot of debate on interest rates. The macroeconomist that spoke last week, her thought was that rates are not going to go up in 2019. She felt that the Fed is done for the year, so that's good news for those of us in housing. And still continued challenges for the builders. Land and lots, as I said, location, price, entitlement, labor shortages. I mean, that's not getting any better. Those of you that are in the custom market, I mean, some of the custom builders I talk to, they'll tell me that the trades are the ones making all the money. The builders that I deal with, the production builders, they don't talk about labor as much now because it's just a given that it's really, really challenging and they don't expect it to get better. They talk about other things. Another interesting thing going on in this market, and I won't dwell on this too much just because you guys probably don't have as much interest, is the kind of the squeeze that the biggest builders are putting on the smaller guys. So the big builders, the big public builders, they're looking at this market this year and saying, okay, if the market's not going to grow, corporate wants me to grow. So I need to increase my market share. And the only way they can do that is take that away from their competitor. And it's easier to take it away from the smaller private builders, especially because they can go out and they can control labor, they can control lot supply, they can do things that the smaller builders can't do. So it puts margin pressure on the smaller builders. And I'm not talking about really custom builders. I'm talking about smaller builders that build, say, under $500,000 or $600,000. So that'll be interesting to see how that plays out this year. But with the market, I mean, I don't think the market's going to grow this year. I think there's demand for it, but we can't provide the right product at the right price, the right location to make that happen. That said, if we build and sell 16,000 houses in Austin, Texas in 2019, that's a lot of houses. That's a lot of business. Everyone will be busy. It just won't be quite as fun for some because they're not going to be able to increase their market share because one of the bigger builders is going to take some of that away from them. So, I expect another good year, but again, it's going to be different. I mean, it's, time passes and it's just a little bit different in terms of the feel of the market this year than it has been the last couple of years. And we have been really, really lucky in this town to have the kind of market that we've had for a number of years. And there's no reason to think, everybody in this room won't have a good year, but you're gonna have to work harder to do it. So, any questions? Other questions? Yeah.
What submarkets are you seeing a little bit of oversupply? I know you talk about price points and what's moving well, but I know there's always pockets around town that are better than others. Is Liberty Hill oversupplied yet?
No, we used to talk a lot about that area up there, but from a lot perspective, a lot of those developers made some adjustments, if you will. And so those adjustments brought in some of the big public builders. So they really are not oversupplied in terms of lots now. The two things. On the production side, the submarkets or subdivisions that have any standing inventory, and it's not significant, but just standing inventory that the builders probably don't want, is really more about product. The builders that have not adjusted and adapted their product to the changing wants and desires and requirements of today's buyers are the ones that are losing sales. So that's the big adjustment that's going on. And then from my experience in talking to realtors primarily and some custom builders in the high end, there's homes that are sitting in some of the higher price subdivisions because they're priced too high. So the inventory that's not priced right is what's sitting. And I talk to a lot of builders that will tell me that, and some of the realtors, that some of the neighborhoods that are luxury neighborhoods, Spartan Creek, Spanish Oak, some of those areas where those homes were built 15 or 20 years ago, they're dated. And not everyone who owns those homes thinks that they're dated in terms of the interiors, and I'm not sure what you do with a Tuscan facade, because today's buyers are not as thrilled about Tuscan. So it's really more particular to product and some of the neighborhoods and not so much oversupplied by units. Does that make sense? Yeah. Sure.
So where do you think, I heard you mention kind of moving south out of 78704, where do you think is, what parts of town in the greater metro Austin area are you seeing the shift moving towards now, like 04 south, south of 71, or you think out Southwest Parkway, or what do you see?
You mean the urban ring, if you will?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't do that for a living, but I have conversations with folks that do. One of the big challenges, as some of you know, as you move south, is you move from areas where there was a lot of SF3 zoning into areas where there's more SF2 zoning and there are deed restrictions. So it's making it, you can't just transition from some of those neighborhoods where I can do a primary and ADU into a neighborhood that's not going to allow that. So you're going to have to be creative in terms of how you do that. So I think east is one of them. And one of the big factors I think that is going to propel the movement east is the improvement, the ongoing improvements to 183. I mean, I don't have the number off the top of my head. I've got some slides that are older. I think it's $80 or $90 million project that is completely transforming 183 on the east side to allow movement from North Austin employers down to the airport. And so I think that's going to be a big deal over there. And then the domain. So the domain is we all know the story there. It's just an amazing reality in terms of the popularity of that area and also the availability of future land masses to support commercial and high density residential. So when you think about moving east of Domain, so the old IBM site, which is called Broadmoor, will support 6 million square feet of office space. And then you look at all of that area east of there that is light industrial. So you've got hundreds and hundreds of acres of area that's zoned commercial, there's no neighborhoods, and it's on, they're functionally obsolete warehouse buildings where they bought the land for $2 or $3 a square foot. So that's not is going to be as much single family detached, but it'll really afford opportunities for high density residential, I think. Does that make sense? So, anybody else? No? Great. Well, thank you guys for inviting me out this evening. Thanks to Capstone. Thanks, Brad. I appreciate it.